Welcome to today's seminar. This is the first seminar of a series virtual speaking organized by CNKI and Alberta AI. The reason we organized this series of speaking is because emerging technology represented by AI played an important role in online education, telecommunication, and online medical care, which we will talk today, and also because University of Alberta play a very important role in AI, and it's one of the 3 hubs in Canada. So and a little bit of background of Alberta AI. Alberta AI was founded 2 years ago because of the big wave of AI and AlphaGo. And for the people who don't know, AlphaGo actually is rooted from University of Alberta. The 2 main authors, David Silver and Ajia Huang, it's a graduate from University of Alberta and Rich Sutton and Martin Muller. So with that, Alberta University have very strong AI research and very top-level scholars. And today's speaker, Eleni, is one of them. We are very fortunate to be able to invite Dr. Eleni to be able to speak to all of us today. And a little bit background about Dr. Eleni. She is a professor in Department of Computer Science, and it's a director of AI4Society Signature Area in University of Alberta. And from 2011 and 2016, she held the NSERC AITF Industrial Research Chair on Service System Management with IBM, and her research focuses on industry-driven problems, adopting AI and machine learning methods to improve and automate tasks. She has played a leadership role in the GRAND and AGE-WELL NCEs, the SAVI Strategic Network, and DITA CREATE Network, which is a long name, but Eleni can explain this thing in her talk. She has supervised more than 50 graduate students, and in 2018 she received McCalla Professorship, and in 2019 Killam Award for Excellence in Mentoring. So please welcome Dr. Eleni to give her a speech. Yeah.
Hello.
Please.
I'm going?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Ying, for the kind introduction. It's my pleasure and my honor to be a member of this lecture series. And I'm very excited to be here, to be able to give you an overview of a few of the activities in my research lab. As Dr. Ying mentioned, I am the director of the newly established Signature Area at the University of Alberta called AI4Society. And the objective of this Signature Area is to enable all sorts of activities towards deepening our knowledge in AI, but also examining applications of AI in all activities of life, entertainment, education, health, as well as understanding the ethical and societal implications that AI has as it's been adopted in all aspects of our life. My research in the past several years has been supported by NSERC, Alberta Innovates, IBM, AGE-WELL, which is a network of centers of excellence on supporting technologies for seniors, and DITA, the Dependable Internet of Things Applications CREATE Network. So without further ado, let me start by saying that the context of my presentation today relies on 4 key scientific and technological advances. There are 4 phenomena today that are essential for transforming the way that healthcare is conducted. And the first one is Internet of Things. Internet of Things technologies enable us to collect data about ourselves. You may have heard the term quantified self, and the term essentially means that we have measurements of many aspects of our physical and mental state, our activities and behaviors. Now, this is a very fascinating concept. Humans have been always interested in actually measuring what they do. In fact, an interesting story is that of Robert Sills. He lived in the mid-1900s, and basically from 1970 to about 1990-something, he was recording every 5 minutes information about what he was eating, his bowel movements, his temperature, and in fact, he was never sleeping more than 2 hours continuously in order to be able to record information throughout the 24 hours of the day. By the end of his life, he had collected a diary of about 37 million words with huge amounts of information about his activities. Now, this kind of information is much easier to accomplish as we have a variety of sensors that can observe every waking moment of our life. The next important thing is machine learning. At the core of many of our activities today is the transformation of the data that we collect into interesting, actionable knowledge. So machine learning is a set of methods that enables us to take data, extract interesting features from these data representations, apply a variety of potential algorithms, and all of these algorithms can be thought of as hypothesis explorations. So all machine learning algorithms search a space of hypotheses with different optimization functions, and they attempt to find a hypothesis that explains the data that have been given as input to the algorithm. These hypotheses, in effect, construct models that summarize the input data, and these models can be used for prediction or classification, or can be used to guide decision making. So essentially, machine learning is the mechanism that can extract value from this data. And it is important to be thoughtful about the types of algorithms that you are using, because since every machine learning algorithm has its own preferences about how to search the hypothesis space and what kind of functions to optimize in order to cover the data, these decisions affect the types of models that are being constructed. So once we have these machine learning models that have explained our data, what can we do next? Essentially, we need to take these machine learning models and put them at the hands of decision makers. And this is possible today because we have a computational and networking infrastructure that wraps the earth many times over. So at any point in time, data collected from sensors can be transferred quite efficiently and quite fast to appropriate machines of different kinds, GPUs, multi-core machines, someplace on the cloud, to do real-time decisions, to extract real-time information and guide decisions at the hands of everybody who's studying, making diagnosis, examining patients. The last thing that is interesting and slightly different of these four phenomena is gamification. The term gamification basically means a set of technologies that take an activity and wrap it inside something that looks like a game. The basic idea is that sometimes humans are not motivated to do something. Several tasks are unpleasant. Sometimes education, learning, studying, exercising is not exactly pleasant for all of us. So one technique for enabling and reminding every one of us to do the right thing is to wrap the activity within a game. So once we are placed in a game, the game triggers us to do the right thing at the right time, provides us with the right information we need to do so. So imagine, for example, a variety of games that basically can be triggered by a wearable physical devices like Fitbit. Fitbit, my own device that I'm wearing right now, happens to be a Garmin, and every so often it reminds me that I haven't walked for quite some time. So what do we have here? We have data collection that has been analyzed to find the general rule that 10,000 steps per day is a good thing and long sitting stretches are bad for you. Therefore, what we have is a trigger so that I can stand up, regularly and exercise and make sure that I'm not living a too sedentary life. So these are the 4 key things that enable us to look at our physical and mental health slightly differently. So I want to talk about different sensors that collect different data and can be used for different aspects of improving our health. As a way of organizing our sensors, I'll take the study of proxemics, which basically says that there are several spaces around every individual, and the space depends on basically the distance of the radius centered in the individual and going outwards. So our intimate space is really our body, our personal space is about 0.5 meter around us. Our social space is about 3 to 4 meters. This would be the space in which we would be talking with our friends and colleagues. And then further out, we have the public space. So if we're considering sensors in our personal space, what are we talking about? We're talking about wearables and mobiles. Today, everybody's carrying one or possibly more smartphones. And smartphones are essentially housing a variety of sensors, including accelerometers, magnetometers, cameras, microphones. And the first example of technology for health that I want to discuss today is our most recent project on recognizing depression from voice. Intuitively, we all understand that our voice communicates information about our mood. So as every parent knows, it's very easy to recognize when your child is upset, sad, happy, because their voice is different. Not only because they say different things, but because they sound differently. So this is the key intuition of our system, which aims to develop this envision infrastructure. So what we have is a smartphone which records my voice as I'm using it. It removes the voice of my interlocutor. It uses a library to extract a variety of features, and I'll come to that. These features get sent over the network to a cloud-based server where machine learning models can do classification of whether my mood is positive or negative, and even regression where they can quantify the likelihood with which I may be depressed. This kind of information extraction can be useful to myself as I'm monitoring my mental health, or potentially my clinician who may use this record to provide advice next time I meet with my own doctor. So let's see how this might work. So what we have done so far is we have analyzed 2 different benchmark data sets. We are in the process of developing an ethics protocol to collect our own data, but up until now, we have analyzed standard benchmark sets available in the literature. And we have experimented with 4 different machine learning algorithms to do binary classification, basically to distinguish whether the voice segment is of a depressed individual or of a non-depressed control, and regression, where a regression task determines the degree to which somebody is depressed. The 2 data sets are the so-called AVEC 2013 and AVEC 2017 data sets. More recently, there has been a new data set released, AVEC 2019, and we're working with it right now. As you can see, they are in German and English. The first one has about 300 recordings, the second, the 2017, 190. The length of the audio segment varies, and the way depression is measured also varies. There are 2 different questionnaires that are being used. The AVEC 2013 has BDI questionnaire associated with every audio segment, where AVEC 2017 uses the simpler PHQ-8. As you can see in both data sets, there is a smaller ratio of individuals with depressions than not. So in the AVEC 2013, 40% of the individuals are depressed. In the AVEC 2017, 30%. This kind of imbalance may have some consequences to the quality of the machine learning models that we're extracting. So let me start by giving you an overview of the analysis pipeline. Given that we're working with benchmark data, what we do is we separate the complete audio segment into different windows, and we extract features from a variety of features from each of these windows. I'll review the different types of features later, but once we have the various features extracted, We do two things. First, we standardize the values of the features so that we have smaller, tighter ranges. And we choose a smaller number of features that are independent from an information perspective in order to simplify the learning task. This clean data set is given to 4 machine learners, and then we extract different models which we evaluate based on a holdout data set provided by these 2 different benchmarks. So let's start with feature extraction. The original OVEC 2013 feature set was including 2267 features, so about 2,300 features. And there is a huge variety of features, and truth be told, I wouldn't be able to explain them all. The important thing to note here is that in the 2013 data set, the features were extracted on windows of 3 seconds length, and the window was shifted forward by 1 second. In the 2017 data set, an additional set of features was extracted, the so-called MEL frequency septal coefficients, MFCCs. These have been found to be highly informational, and there are 51 features in all. And an innovation here is that these features, we extracted them in 25 millisecond windows. Even though the benchmark has been traditionally used with 3-second windows, we have found in the literature, in the linguistics literature, that the advisable window is 25 milliseconds. Data cleaning involves standardization, subtracting the mean for every feature and scaling to unit variance. And then we applied principal component analysis, which essentially reduced the set of features that we worked with from 2,300 to about 790 features. Basically, about 30% of the features were equally effective from an information point of view as the original 2,300. Now, this kind of principal component analysis, dimensionality reduction, is essential for making the learning task practical. Otherwise, the machine learners will take way too much time, So we have experimented with 4 machine learners. These 4 have been used in other works in the literature for speech recognitions and speech analysis, and this is how we chose them. And let's see what we found. So remember, we have 2 tasks. The first is classification, depressed or not, and the second is regression, how depressed. For the first data set, the 2013 data set, we obtained classification accuracy of about 78%, which was better than the recent state-of-the-art of Lopez-Otero et al., which was 70%. And this result was obtained with MFCC features, remember only 51, on the 25 millisecond window, and using a deep neural network as a classifier. Classification on the 2017 dataset was higher, 85%, and that was again obtained with the MFCC's features and deep neural network, but on the 3-second window. Going to regression, for the 2013, random forms performed the best, giving us an RMSE error of 9.75, which is better than the recent established in the literature of 9.89. And that was produced by a random forest classifier machine learning model with a window of 3 seconds on the 790 features extracted from the original feature set. Finally, regression on the 2017 benchmark, we obtained an even smaller error of 5.76, which again is better than the most recent result of Ringeval and Fabian, which was 7.78. And that was with gradient boosting tree on 25 millisecond window and MFCCs. So what does this tell us? So first off, it tells us that there's no single machine learning algorithm that is performing the best on all of these tasks. So clearly, there is much more to do in order to be able to configure a single machine learning algorithm to outperform all of them. The other thing that is obvious is that the feature selection is of critical importance, and so is the window of analysis. We're currently experimenting with utterances. So instead of looking at a standard window size, we segment the interviews in terms of coherent sentences, basically delineating utterances as everything that is being sent between two pauses. We're finding the notion of utterances to be more effective in terms of both classification accuracy and low RMSE than the window-based approaches. The other thing, the positive news, is that indeed it looks like machine learning can provide meaningful information as evidence to clinicians taking care of patients about the degree to which their patients may be depressed. And if we can actually deploy these methods remotely to individuals who may not have access to personal health care in their neighborhood. In fact, now with the pandemic, everybody is disinclined from visiting their psychiatrist or psychologist, and these kinds of automated methods are becoming much more relevant. So these kinds of methods indeed are useful potentially as a means of providing more broadly access to mental health care to people who need it and may or may not have been diagnosed yet. The next step, again, focusing on the personal sphere, is a different experiment that we have been doing in the context of our work with seniors. Seniors, older adults, often are faced with challenges of dementia or Alzheimer's. And the typical approach to helping seniors with dementia is to engage them in activities in day homes or regular long-term care facilities, and to follow their progression in terms of the disease with standard validated questionnaires. Now, questionnaires are boring, and activities that are happening in a long-term care facility cannot be easily evaluated whether they have an impact on helping people maintaining the cognitive status longer. So what we have done is we have built a series of games. All of them have been developed with model-driven engineering methodologies so that every game has a model underlying it, and the various levels of the game are produced with different parameters of the model so that the various levels are incrementally, systematically becoming more difficult. All these games are fun games. So we have built Whack-A-Mole, which is an old arcade game, Word Search, Bejeweled, and Mahjong. And we are deploying these games with seniors. And what we have found is that, first off, they seem to be able to learn and increase their ability to go further into the game, reach more difficult levels. And more importantly, these games have to have an improvement in their quality of life, since seniors enjoy the interaction with the games and the fact that they're competing with other seniors in their facility. So let me give you an example of what our games look like.
Word search. In this game.
So this is a game that basically allows people to search for words on a grid. As the levels increase, the grid becomes bigger and the words become more difficult. And the explanation is given by one of the seniors who's working closely with us, with our group, to help us develop the games better. Oops. Let me go back and...
Word search. In this game, the player is presented with a grid of letters on a computer screen and a list of words to be found. They are then asked to use a finger or stylus to slide along combinations of adjacent letters that form words from the list. The words may be left to right, right to left, up or down, or on diagonals. The player starts by touching the first or last letter of the word and swipes only the rest of the word. This will turn the tiles blue and they will show as used. If an incorrect letter is touched, it will turn red and the player will start over to swipe only the letters of the word. The same letter may be used more than once.
That's enough. So what I have shown you up to now is two activities. The first one is supporting diagnosis. So data is collected from an individual as they speak on their cell phone. Data is analyzed and a classification or regression is run to estimate the degree to which the individual speaking may be depressed. This information is not conclusive. It is simply yet another piece of evidence for the clinician managing the health of the user. With the games, we have an intervention. We have designed a technology that enables people to train their cognitive status. And as we collect data from people playing our games over the long run, we can develop models for basically classifying cognitive status based on people's ability to play the game from the beginning to as long as they can. So essentially what we have is the games are both an intervention and also can play a diagnostic role. Moving forward, I want to move to the social space. So what happens when the sensors are not on our bodies? We're not holding the devices in our hands, like the mobile or the tablet where we play games, but the sensors are in the environment. So what can we do with ambient sensing? The work that I want to talk to you about now is the Smart Condo. The Smart Condo was the first project that I started with colleagues in occupational therapy, nursing, industrial design, and education. And that was my first activity exploring the impact of technology in healthcare. So the key idea in the Smart Condo is that activities of daily living, our ability as humans to live independently, can be assessed based on the types of things that we do in our homes. Basically, our ability to sweep and clean the floor, our ability to cook independently, exercise a bit, do laundry, all of these basic tasks. The degree to which we're able to do these basic tasks independently are used by occupational therapists to decide on whether somebody should be moving to a long-term care facility or they can live independently at home. So we have been working with a rehabilitation hospital right here in Edmonton. And what they have is a small apartment where they want to have people who have suffered a major event, either surgery or stroke, and they want the patients to stay in the apartment for a couple of days in order to assess whether they can be living independently. So if the patient, after the major surgery, can stay in the apartment without any help for a couple of days, this indicates that the patient can go home safely. Now, the problem is that we do not know if patients can indeed live independently. So it turns out that Glenrose put cameras in the apartment in order to monitor the patients from afar. Now, patients hated the cameras, and the question became, can we know how people are doing in the apartment without cameras, but with sensors? So what you see here in the video is at the bottom screen is our Smart Condo in the Edmonton Clinic Health Academy. This is a simulation space, so we don't have patients living there. It's only for us and our students to run simulation studies. And at the top, we have a 3D model of the same space. And I'll start the video and I'll start narrating. What we see here is one of our first students in the Smart Condo activity. As she's walking and performing activities in the real Smart Condo, as we can see, observed by cameras in the bottom screen, sensors embedded in the environment collect data. This data is analyzed, and through the analysis, the algorithms recognize what the person is doing in the real world. And this recognition is replayed by the avatar we see at the top screen moving around. So if you follow closely, the avatar in the top screen follows Julia's activities in the bottom screen. I should mention here that the information from the cameras that has been collected to show us what Julia is doing in the bottom screen is not part of the analysis. We're just using it for establishing the ground truth of what indeed is happening. And if you notice, the avatar is following Julia quite closely, which basically provides evidence that ambient sensors can provide high quality information about people's activities at home. Now, it's interesting to note here that we cannot have cameras in the bathroom, but we can have sensors on the water faucet, on the toilet to see if somebody has been flushing, that can indicate whether people are actually visiting the toilet and how much. So let me explain a little bit deeper how this works. I will talk about work primarily conducted by a master's student a couple of years ago. Her name is Baiza Mohebi. And what we did is we conducted a study with about 26 participants in the smart condo. The smart condo has two types of sensors at the very. There are more types of sensors in the smart condo, but in this study, we're using and analyzing two types. The first is passive infrared motion sensors, and the second is Bluetooth eye beacons, which are basically stickers that you can attach to the wall. The passive infrared sensors are attached to the ceiling, and they cover a space on the floor of about it's a diamond space, almost square, with the two diagonals being 2 meters by 1.75. It's almost square. The beacons, the passive infrared sensors emit a signal every 3 seconds. So what we get from every sensor is an event every 3 seconds indicating the ID of the sensor and whether it is on or off. A sensor is on if there is somebody in that pyramid space that is being covered by the sensor. On the other hand, the beacons are attached to the wall and they cover a semicircle around their point of attachment. Through our experiments, we have seen that the RSSI signal of a beacon drops quite significantly after 1 meter. So what we do in the smart condo is we use we threshold the RSSI signal, and if it is below 70 decibels, we assume that there is somebody within 1 meter of the eye beacon. The eye beacons emit data every 1 second, and the events that they emit are of slightly different types. So we have the ID of the beacon, the device, the mobile, in order to perceive that somebody is in the proximity of the eye beacon, we need a mobile app. And in effect, when the mobile app finds itself in the proximity of the beacon, it emits an event. So what we have in this event is the beacon ID, the device ID, in effect, the app ID, the timestamp, and the RSSI. If the RSSI is below 70 decibels, then we assume that the mobile app, the mobile phone, is within 1 meter from the beacon. Now, as you can see here, we have, I want to indicate that BLE devices are prone to errors. So we have very frequent outages from iBeacon. So even though somebody is close to the sticker, we have no data. And if the outage is of a short length, we interpolate it. Otherwise, we exclude these windows from our analysis. So let me give you a high-level overview of the algorithm that we're using to essentially fuse these two streams of information. Every time we have a transmission, an event that comes either from a motion sensor or from an iBeacon, we superimpose the coverage of the sensor with a grid on the floor. And for every cell on this floor grid of our space, if the cell overlaps with the sensor that has emitted the event, we basically establish we color this grid with the information that we have some evidence that there is a person on that grid. We call these maps confidence maps, and what we have here is if the motion sensor emits an event, we know that there may be somebody in the particular grid. We do not know who. If the beacon emits an event, then we have the ID of the mobile device that sends the beacon. Therefore, this information is eponymous. We know which person, which mobile device is in the proximity of the beacon. Now, as you can see from this high-level algorithm, we assign different weights to the evidence that comes from motion sensors, rather relative to the evidence that comes from iBeacons. This is because, as I have mentioned, iBeacons are often exhibiting outages, and they have not very consistent behavior. So we have seen that the RSSI signal has outliers. So therefore, we give more weight to the evidence that comes from motion sensor, 0.9, and less weight to the evidence that comes from iBeacons, 0.7. So let me show you a little bit how this works with pictures. So a motion sensor at a particular timestamp, two motion sensors emit events. And these motion sensors cover the red grids on our floor. So what you can see here is two different areas that are covered by the two different motion sensors that have emitted an event, which basically means that there are two individuals, we do not know which two, in these two areas. At the same time, a beacon recognizes that person one is in this area. So if you see the right picture, which is looking something like a hat, is the area of coverage of the iBeacon, and at the same time, the iBeacon recognizes that it is P1 who's carrying a mobile device close to this iBeacon. So now if we superimpose the two grids, the two confidence maps, what we have is essentially an unambiguous piece of evidence of where P1 is. We know from the motion sensor that somebody is in the top right area. We know from the beacon that P1 is in this area that looks like a hat. If we superimpose these two areas, P1 is identified. Once we know where P1 is, given our knowledge that there are only two individuals, we can disambiguate where P2 is basically on the other area that is covered by the other motion sensor. This is how the algorithm works, essentially. Every beacon, every sensor provides some evidence of somebody being on a grid, and we use the beacons for disambiguating on who is on the grid, and we propagate this information to identify by implication the other people in the space. So let me tell you about our experiment. This is an architectural drawing, a high-level architectural drawing of our smart condo apartment, the one that I showed you in the video before. The green diamonds are the motion sensors attached to the ceiling. The red stars are the estimates that are attached to objects and walls. And the cameras on the ceiling are used to collect the ground truth, as I showed you in the video before. What we did is we invited 26 participants, these were University of Alberta students primarily, to go into the condo and perform a sequence of scripted activities. We had 7 pairs being at the same time in the condo and 12 individuals alone. The experiment lasted about 2 hours, and our participants were given a protocol like it's shown to the right of my screen. So basically, they were given very specific instructions on what to do. So upon arrival, they have to use our app to mark the beginning of time. They have to open the closet door and put their clothes in the closet, and they have to mark the time on when they did that. So essentially, we asked our participants to keep a very detailed log of what they were doing, and they were carrying with themselves a mobile device, an Android device, running the application for beacon localization. So what did we find? I want you to remember that we have experiments with 2 people and experiments with 1 person. And we wanted to see what is the quality of our inferences with different combinations of sensors and with 1 or 2 people. So the first column shows our single participant experiments. If you look at these 2 tables, the top table includes both motion sensors and estimates, iBeacons. The second table has only motion sensors. By comparing these 2 data, we can see that the estimates improve the accuracy, but increase the standard deviation. So what does this mean? When an iBeacon fires, most of the time it is because they recognize that the person carrying the mobile is really close to them, basically within 1 meter distance. So therefore, once they fire, we have very strong evidence about the location of a person. Unfortunately, because of frequent outages and errors in the RSSI signal, this information is not consistent. So as you can see, for session 1.1 and session 1.3, the standard deviation is quite higher when we use estimate data. Now let's look at the experiment with 2 participants on the right-hand side of the screen. When both participants have phones, what we see is that it doesn't make much difference whether we use motion sensors and estimates or I'm sorry, what I'm comparing here is that we have either 1 participant or both of them holding mobile phones. And we're using both motion sensors and iBeacons. So what we see from this data that it actually doesn't matter if both participants have phones or not. It is enough for a single participant to have a phone, and then the second individual gets disambiguated quite effectively, which basically has implications for our study because we do not expect our seniors to be consistently carrying their phones. So if you are in a scenario where you have a person who is being cared for, we do not need this person to remember to carry a phone. We just need the caregivers to carry their phones, and therefore, by implication, we can understand the activities of the person who is being cared for. Now, if we compare the first and the third table, this comparison is examining what is the impact of using motion sensors and estimates or motion sensors only, or BLE estimates only. So what we have here is that estimates, the way we had deployed them in the smart condo, cover most of the areas where people can walk around. So therefore, they're highly accurate in localizing our individuals, albeit with problems in accuracy. So to summarize, what did we see here? We see that ambient sensing can provide high quality information. I forgot to mention that if we try to recognize activity for a very short time window, every second, the data is quite noisy. This comes from several reasons. First, the motion sensors fire every 3 seconds, so the person can move quite a bit between 2 firings. Also, having ground truth information is quite difficult, so we cannot be so precise in understanding where everybody is every second. However, it's not very important to have this kind of resolution. Every 60 seconds, every minute is good enough, because if we want to see if people are independent and they live and move appropriately in their home, 1 minute is good enough resolution. So for that scenario, ambient sensing allows us to understand how mobile people are, whether they have stopped moving for quite some time. We can compare how they're moving consistently day across day or week over week, or as time passes, we can see if the patterns of movement change, which might indicate deterioration. So therefore, ambient sensing is a potential method for actually understanding how independent people are at home and recognizing changes in this independence that may indicate the need to transition to a different type of care, such as a long-term facility, for example. Last but not least, I want to go to virtual gym. Virtual gym is a system that we have developed to help people exercise at home. In Canada, we have long winters, and right now with the pandemic, people are not inclined to go and exercise outside, and seniors often need to follow an exercise regimen to rehabilitate themselves from different conditions. So the virtual gym is a system that provides seniors with instructions on how to exercise. So what we see here is Stuart, one of our seniors, exercising with virtual gym. The setup here is a display, a big display on the wall with a Kinect camera on top of the display. On the display, Stuart sees an avatar that demonstrates the exercises that he has to perform. The interesting thing about the avatar is that it is dynamically controlled by a model that describes the exercise. So what we have is the tool for exercise therapists to describe the exercises they want the seniors to perform. And this description gets translated to a demonstration. Stuart follows the demonstration, and when he's doing well, the shadow matches the avatar exactly. And when the shadow matches the avatar, the outline of the shadow becomes green, and this is how Stuart knows that he's doing well. The system provides feedback continuously, and the system can be adjusted to provide the same exercises in a sitting position if somebody is not able to stand. We have used this with several seniors' homes with quite a bit of success, and Victor Fernandez is spinning out his company now with virtual gym and the second version of the virtual gym in virtual reality. So that pretty much concludes my presentation. What are the messages that I'm hoping I have communicated? First, it's clear that we have devices, we have sensors, we have cameras that provide us with huge opportunities to observe our activities and guide our activities in ways that can help us lead healthier lives longer. Internet of Things has provided a huge variety of wearable and ambient sensors, and I'll mention here that there are a variety of even ingestible sensors for much more clinical information. But essentially, these sensor technologies enable us to collect a continuous stream of physiological and behavioral parameters. And these data, given to machine learners, can be transformed into classifications of our physical, cognitive, and mental state, which is essentially evidence that can be taken into account for diagnosis. And not only is this analysis helpful for diagnosis, this analysis can be embedded in activities that can help us improve our physical condition. And this is the role that I hope have demonstrated games to play. Now, our job as researchers and scientists is to take advantage of these opportunities to make sure that everybody has the potential of living longer, healthier lives. And to do that, we need to make sure that everybody can afford these devices, and we need to inform people about how these devices work in order to get their informed consent on how this data will be used. We need to make sure that we collect representative data. We need to take into account different body sizes, different genders, different socioeconomic status and education. because this kind of representation in the data will enable us to construct high-quality machine learning models that will provide us with accurate information. And this work has to be done within legal frameworks so that both users and clinicians can trust this information, because without trust, none of this technology will be adopted. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Eleni. Yeah, for excellent talk and share a lot of great knowledge with us. And I really like if we have a chance to visit your smart condo for the people already in Edmonton, in Alberta.
I would love to host you there. Let's try to arrange it.
Yeah, sure. So for the people from China or internationally, probably they can have a tour and welcome to visit Alberta and have a schedule with Dr. Ellie and visit the smart condo. That's really interesting. Yeah, and I have a few questions from the audience. The first question is considering the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, what's the specific application or positive impact it will bring, because of the pandemic?
So one thing that we just started deploying our Vibrant Minds games. I showed you word search, but we have also Whack-A-Mole, Bejeweled, and Mahjong. And we started just making them available to anyone who wants to use them. And we believe that games can help people become more engaged and have fun, because when we're stuck at home, we have limited opportunities for entertainment. And games can provide a distraction. So not only they can help with cognitive exercise, but they can help with mood. So that's one thing that we're doing right now. Victor Fernandez is actually, it was successful in obtaining some funding to get, to buy devices. The problem with virtual gym and the virtual reality virtual gym is that you have to wear goggles. And you cannot share goggles between people now with the pandemic. So we have bought a set of goggles, which we will be giving to the seniors that we're working with in order to collect more data. But basically, the pandemic demonstrates to everyone that when people are stuck at home, we can potentially use technology to just substitute for visits with a doctor, visits to the gym, social life. We can socialize by playing games with our friends. And I think that kind of provides a not pleasant context, but a very compelling context for much of this work.
Yeah, I did see a lot of expedite the activity, government putting a lot of money to speed up the technology investment. And what's the negative impact about because of the pandemic? Anything slow down because of the pandemic in this space? We speed up, but we might slow down something as well.
Yes, many of our studies were face-to-face studies. And when you're working with seniors, most of them are immunosuppressed, so there are more populations in danger. So we don't want to visit seniors to conduct studies. So we're trying to develop new methodologies for doing everything remotely. Everybody's becoming an expert in Zoom now. But the thing that I want to mention is that mental health is a problem with the pandemic. So I'm involved with several initiatives that are trying to provide both diagnostic tools, but also mental health support tools to people stuck at home. This is a real danger. So as we're trying to be safe from the virus and we get stuck at home and we get isolated, and isolation is a very bad influence on people's mental health. So mental health services, remote mental health, means for remote diagnosis are hugely important. And we're involved in, I think, about 3-4 new projects that are starting in this area with the voice analysis tool.
And we have a specific question about iBeacon. So it's iBeacon require the user to install some apps?
Yes.
Oh, it's not like by default we are collecting the iBeacon signal.
So basically, it is the app that is reading the signal. So
the signal it's not by default coming from the cell phone. Need some kind of configuration and installation.
No, it's on the phone. We run an app, and it is our own app. But iBeacons come with their own apps too, which essentially the app recognizes the iBeacon signal.
Oh, okay. And we have a few more generic questions, like what's the, in general, like the AI technology, what's the new challenge we are facing?
I think for me, the most difficult thing now is to use these tools. So deep neural networks and generative adversarial networks are very complex machines that have many, many parameters. So as a researcher studying the work in this field, it's often very difficult to understand what works and why. And it's very difficult to replicate experiments. So as we're experimenting with different machine learning algorithms with our voice data, we have found extreme sensitivity to parameters, and it's very expensive and time-consuming to set the right parameters. And given the variety of parameters and the tons of work that goes into configuring these parameters, it's very difficult to replicate work and build on it. So we need to have better mechanisms for reporting exactly what we're doing so that people can build on each other's work. I think this is the hugest challenge right now.
Okay. Yeah, it's like people are like the deep learning stuff. It's a black box, and explainable AI is a hot topic right now for sure.
Yeah, it's a very complex black box, and people do not explain in the papers all the knobs and tweaks that they do to the algorithms to make them work.
Yeah, and the next question we have is so the voice and the tone for like depression detection, the behavior detection. So if we have enough enough data available, is it visible? Like what's the accuracy will looks like for the depression?
What we saw, what I showed you is that in the two data sets, the accuracy was about 80%. And and that's accuracy between depressed and non-depressed. So we can recognize, now this is a very hard decision. It's very difficult to say depressed versus non-depressed because the scale of depression is from 0 to 63, and from 0 to 19 you're non-depressed, but from 20 to 63 you're depressed in different degrees. So this classification task, I don't think it's very useful. I think it's a very coarse-grained classification. However, it might be useful as a flag if the machine learning algorithm classifies you as depressed. That might be something that is an alert, especially for people who haven't been diagnosed. Maybe you're concerned, but you have not seen a doctor yet. Using the app, if you get many depressed classifications,
it's very difficult to 100%.
Yeah, and people are not depressed all the time. So even people who
something like that.
You got a little bit interrupted, so I'm not sure if we were talking on top of each other. So,
okay.
So essentially, for the depression task, what I think is important is to have multiple data, multiple speech samples over time, because even when somebody suffers from depression, they're not in a depressive state all the time. So you might get a sample that does not look depressed, even though the individual is prone to depression. So we need regular samples and lots of data in order to fine-tune these algorithms and, be confident in their results. However, even as they are right now, they're useful as an alert signal for someone to go and seek help.
Okay. So because of the time, we have one last question. the last question is like, what field or aspect of AI do you think are weaker than human intelligence? Like, in other words, like which field or industry cannot be replaced by AI in the future?
When I was doing my PhD, my objective, my dream was to simulate intelligence, to substitute intelligence, to come up with an artificial intelligence that is the same as human intelligence. I think this is not a good objective now. I think what we want is we want to build these environments where machines do what they're good at and humans do what they're good at. One problem that I see is that decision-making is not rational. Decision-making is guided by culture, by ethics and morals. And I do not see machines being taught ethics and morals anytime soon. So even if machines are going to be excellent in analyzing images and voice in high detail and provide evidence, it is our judgment that has to come into play in order to make decisions. So at this point in time, I think that what we're looking for is augmenting human intelligence with machines at many steps of our decision-making process, not substituting. I think that we are responsible for our decisions as moral and ethical beings, and we cannot abdicate this responsibility, but we can make better decisions assisted by machines.
Yeah, that's very well said. Like, AI is not replacing humans; it's just helping humans. Right? Okay.
I would hope so.
Yeah. So thank you again, Dr. Eleni. Our session will finish right here today, and hope we have more chance to visit a Smart Candle virtual gym and have more discussion in future with Dr. Eleni.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you everyone. Our session will over now. Yeah, see you in next speaker session.
Bye everyone.
Bye everyone.